Dock House, Halton Road, Barry. I'm just wondering if there was more information available for why that was rejected. Just in the context of, I'm aware of other applications being made on that site at present, on which I am being consulted, but I had no information regarding, I think, this one here.
I guess this is a building regulations one as opposed to a planning application. That might be the reason why. Vicky?
Yeah, quite right. Because it's building regs, obviously we wouldn't normally consult with members. I don't have the exact information as to why this has been refused, but I can make sure that I get that to you.
Thank you. So we're happy to move and note those. We haven't done that yet. Yes. Thank you. Move and note building regs. Item 6 is our delegated planning applications. Move and note. Thank you very much. Item 7 is our appeals section. Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. A good report for us this month. So there's 4 appeal decisions, all of which the council won. So I'll just briefly go through those. One related to land south of the A48 in Bombleston. It was a proposal for residential development. It was outside the settlement boundary, and the applicant was arguing that it was a form of rounding off of the settlement, but the appeal inspector agreed with us that it would be harmful to the settlement, to the conservation area, and was not appropriate infilling or rounding off of the settlement boundary. The next one relates to street works at Bronagh Moor at the Knapp. This was for a 10.5 metre high telegraph pole. Again, appeal dismissed. The inspector agreed with us that the applicants had not gone into sufficient effort to consider alternative sites, and in view of the harm to the conservation area, wasn't satisfied that that was justified. The next one being Little West Apartments in Southerndown. Again, a residential development outside of the settlement boundary. The inspector agreed with us that the development did not amount to sensitive infilling or rounding off. And finally, Broad Street Motors down on Cardiff Road in Barry. Proposal to subdivide part of the existing car showroom business at Broad Street Motors to allow for 2 separate units of A1 retail use. The inspector agreed with us in terms of the applicant hadn't gone far enough to demonstrate that there wouldn't be harm to local town and neighbourhood centres and so on, and that there wasn't a proven justifiable need for the retail use, and that it couldn't be considered to be I can't think of the word. Not a suitable development. I can't think of the word. A subsidiary to the ancillary. Thank you, Steve. I knew it would come eventually. Ancillary to the industrial units. So 4 out of 4, meaning that our appeal statistics have gone up to 70% success rate, as shown on page 35.
Okay, we're happy to note those. I did ask for less gloating time as possible, but I think some of the points that come out of that really do stand us in, it really do reflect interestingly on certain decisions we've made recently, and so it's useful to see that some of the decisions we made have been held up by the planning inspector. Moving on to item 8, delegated trees. Happy to move and note those. Thank you. Moving on to item 9, enforcement action, land adjacent to TSAV, Peterson Super Ely. Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. 2 quite similar enforcement reports this evening. This one relates to land at TSAV and Peterson Super Ely. There is some relevant history in terms of the persons involved here who have been subject to separate enforcement action at nearby landowners South Farm. The investigations around this land related to the use of the land for unauthorised or unapproved builders merchant storage and so on. Those matters are still being investigated, but throughout the course of the investigation we also noted that there was residential use and activity taking place on this land. You can see from the photographs on page 39 and 40 of the reports the residential use occurring at the site within the buildings, and also one of the landowners, Mr. Williams, confirmed at the site visit with the enforcement officer that residential use was occurring. There is no justification provided, nor would we expect that there could be a satisfactory justification for this residential use in the countryside, akin to a sort of rural enterprise type justification. Therefore, we are seeking authorisation to serve an enforcement notice, as detailed on page 47 of the report, the cessation of the use of the land and the site for residential purposes and the removal of the land of the dwelling and outbuildings associated with that use.
Councillor Bird? Move officer recommendations. Second, thank you. All in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Moving on to 9.2, West Wind Farm, Penny Turnpike Road, Dinas Powys. Vicky?
Thank you, Chair. This also relates to a residential use of the land. This is land as you go out of Dinas Powys in the countryside on Penny Turnpike Road. The history of the site was that we did grant planning permission for a new access and a stable block, and that has been partially implemented with the provision of the new access, but the stable block has not yet commenced. Meanwhile, a caravan has been sited on the site. At page 50, it shows the two locations. Firstly, it was located at the end of the access track, set back within the site, and has more recently been moved up close to the highway known as Penny Turnpike Road. It's quite clearly visible. Anyone that's driven along there recently probably would have noticed it. We have served a planning contravention notice on the owners of the site to try and establish the use of the building, and the response to that was a little bit vague, to be frank. But you know, we have had anecdotal evidence that the site is being used for residential purposes. The applicant, oh sorry, not the applicant, but the owner of the land has expressed that they believe they're benefiting from permitted development rights for the siting of the caravan. And as our report sets out, we don't believe that they are benefiting from those rights. That firstly, those rights are associated with works being carried out to undertake a planning permission. They are arguing that they are undertaking the works to the stable, which frankly they are not currently constructing the stable, but in any event we would argue that it wouldn't be necessary to live on the site to construct a stable. Stables get built all over the countryside without the need for you to be living on site to build them. So so we don't agree that there's any permitted development rights benefiting this caravan. So again, we are seeking enforcement action to remove the caravan from the site. The cessation of the use of the land for the residential purposes and or the storage of the caravan, and the removal of the caravan associated paraphernalia from the land.
Okay. Anybody want to mention, comment on that at all? Move recommendations, thank you. I never like to just go ahead and move it myself. I'd rather the committee let me know if there's anything they want to raise before that happens. Okay, so that's moved, seconded, and all in favour, please. Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, moving on to item 10, planning applications. Start with planning application 2013/00833/FUL, opposite Hensel Villas in Hensel. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. We've had two matters rising on this application. First, comments from the Council's ecologist, raising no objections subject to NRW's response. NRW have also responded, and they've confirmed that they see no reason why a Great Crested Newt licence wouldn't be issued. So the application itself relates to, on the screen in front of you, is 7 field parcels that's located to the east of Hensel Villas and to the southwest of junction 34 of the M4. To the west, beyond to the west, you've got this Hensel Castle and the Vale Resort, and to north of that, Lanark Vineyard, and that big large building on to the right, to the east, is the Rennie Shore, just off the M4. So the application is for change of use from agricultural land for use as a private football training facility to be used by Cardiff City Football Club. The scheme is mainly the provision of pitches, which will be 15. The site itself is 18 hectares, The proposal includes, if I just run through the slides, it's probably the easiest. So as part of the application, we've got an existing plan showing hedgerows and trees. As you can see, the sort of central core of hedgerow network has to be removed to accommodate the network of pitches. There's some peripheral trees down the left-hand side of the site. Those have been removed mainly on the basis that they're overhanging the highway. So the plan in front of you is the main layout. So there are 15 pitches. The area in the middle with around a blue dot, that's the clubhouse building. Now that's probably worth noting, that's subject to separate planning application. So all the application in front of you is just to deal with the pitches and the principle of the change of use. So all the pitches are grass. The scheme proposed some minor regrading to accommodate the pitches. The peripheral, the colours, the blue and the yellow and the orange are wildflower, different sort of seed mixes. It's quite an ecology-based scheme. The purple dots are small loggeries for insects and wildlife, etc. As part of the application, they've submitted details of the various parking areas which are located around the site. Again, this is the main landscaping around the periphery of the site. One of the key things is enclosure around the site. This is by way of a 2.4 metre high paladin fence. This is the sort that's just been erected around the sports centre. So it's quite a lightweight wire mesh fence, and that'll be set inside the main tree and hedge line. Again, in terms of the levels, a number of existing sections have been shown on as part of the submission. We've assessed those. If you compare it to the proposed levels, very, very minor regrading just to accommodate the general levels across the site. The scheme does include a building. It's a ground maintenance building. It's mainly a workshop building with some part of it is first floor offices, and also ground floor workshop. Material finish is very much from agricultural. There's timber cladding, profiled metal sheeting, and some parts of it are brick as well. So the rest of the plans really just highlight the parking areas. So in terms of the application itself, we've had 19 letters of representation. They have raised a number of concerns, mainly in relation to the proximity to neighbouring properties, concerns about landscaping, concerns about ecological impacts. It's all set out in the report. So the main issues in the officer's report, one is the principle of development, agricultural land quality, the visual impact, in particular ecology is a detailed section on ecology. We've had a number of ecology surveys in. In fact, the reason why the application was held up quite significantly was due to ecology surveys. So both NLW and our ecologists are happy that the mitigation proposed will maintain the conservation status of the protected species. Again, impacts on flooding and archaeology. So the officer's recommendation is it's approved subject to two conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. We've got no registered speakers on this or any applications this evening. Any member wish to make a comment on this application or any questions? Councillor Bird.
I'll move officer's recommendation, Chair, if no one wants to speak.
Is there a second of that? Councillor Parker. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. So just a couple of questions. There was, I'm just thinking about, sort of future use or not use of this site. There was specific reference in the presentation there about these being grass pitches. And so I'm just considering long-term impacts. Should there be a move towards some form of hybrid 3G, 4G pitch in future, and the impacts that on the land there. I've got a couple of queries. Should I do them at once, or do you want to answer them individually? Yep.
That's probably easier. It's a valid point. I mean, obviously, a lot of the visual impact is based on the fact that they are grass pitches, albeit the land will be reprofiled. So in reality, it's not going to look like agricultural fields. They're going to look manicured, quite engineered. But from a distant viewpoint, they will, even though it's quite well screened, it will be grass. So the issue is whether it'll be development. And I think our point of view, removing grass probably to a sort of 12 inches depth and then laying an engineered sub-base to that, and particularly with 3G pitches or 4G pitches, I mean, there's no reason why they couldn't be blue, etc. So I think from our point of view, we would say that would be development. I mean, we are approving grass pitches, and I actually clarified that point with the officer today. So grass pitches is what's approved. If they divert from that, they'd have to apply for a separate application.
So my follow-up to that then is regarding floodlighting and you know, sort of what's proposed here, what might be proposed in the future, and the impact upon the wider area.
Again, that was probably one of the first questions we asked. The scheme has no floodlighting, which must be quite surprising for a facility of this size, but we've asked the question. There's a specific condition that states no floodlighting shall be, even goes as far to say temporary floodlighting, so something that wouldn't normally need development. So we're covering both sides, we're covering the permanent and the temporary floodlighting, because there clearly would be impacts for bats, etc., and visual impacts, glare, etc., etc. Not to say that if we didn't have an application in future for floodlighting, that we need to carefully consider it, and it may well be acceptable subject to time limits and caroling, etc., and the type of lighting. But there's a condition that so as it stands, the no floodlighting is proposed, and there's a condition that confirms that.
And then my third and probably final point at here is regarding the archaeology, which I think is discussed in the report, but you've only mentioned, I think, almost in passing. I'm just looking for reassurances on that basis.
Find the section. If you look at page 78, Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust recommend that the requirement for the surveys can be required by condition, which is pretty standard. I mean, there are often instances where they think there's a high archaeological value, and they'd often want surveys to be undertaken prior to determination. But here, from their exercise they've done, it's a relatively low level, but need it to be recorded. So condition 8 covers that off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone got any other points not mentioned in the reports? In which case, I'll move to a vote on the motion as moved, moving officer's recommendations. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? I didn't see Councillor Thomas raise his hand at all. Okay, unanimous. Thank you very much. Next item is next planning application is 2016/00927/FUL, 33 Holton Road, Barry. I know we have some matters arising on this, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, before we go into describing this application and the merits of it, it's worth just drawing members' attention to the matters arising. We've received contact from the planning agent on this one. You'll recall from the report that there has been an expression from one of our registered social landlords to potentially purchase this development proposal, and for that reason the developers have asked that actually the matter be deferred pending sort of the finalisation of that arrangement, because that will have an impact on both the viability case which is presented in this latest report, but also the overall section 106 requirements, and potentially some layout changes. So officers are actually recommending that this matter be deferred for another later planning committee.
Thank you. I'm happy to move that recommendation. Councillor Bird has his hand up before Councillor Johnson. Seconding?
Yeah, I'll second if you've moved. I was going to move.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I mean, I was also going to move the deferral, but just wanted to draw attention to the fact that the reason for the call initially wasn't to do with the section 106. It was to do with the development of the site, and those concerns. I still have those concerns. Okay,
we'll note those, and I'm sure that it will end up coming back to us in view of the call-in. Okay, all those in favour of deferral? Thank you. That's moved. I'll allow Councillor Parker to leave the room now. We're moving on to the next planning application. Our final planning application is 2018/00279/FUL, rear of 2 Stanwell Road in Penarth. Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. This is subject to a site visit this morning, so a number of members turned up at the site visits who had a good chance to look at what was on site. So very briefly, in terms of the site itself, it's located very much in the centre of Penarth, to the west of the tennis club, to south of the library, and the back of the properties, large properties in Stanwell Road. So the site was formerly a car park, which was used for office parking for the properties in 2 Stanwell Road. The principal property at the front, that's already been subject to conversions, and the works have been completed on site. So this is really the leftover part of the site, so it's more or less a second phase of development. So in terms of a bit of history on the site, we previously approved a single dwelling on the site, and this, so the principal residential redevelopment has been granted. This application really seeks to more or less subdivide and slightly alter the plot and design of the single house to provide 2 semi-detached properties on the site. And if we just run down on the plan, so the existing plan shows the parking layout. It's worth noting that the existing parking has several spaces which serve the number 6 Stanwell Road to the rear, which comprises of flats. So the new scheme very much follows the philosophy of the approved scheme, with the new dwellings at the top end of the site. It's semi-detached style of property. It's split level between the 2. So the design actually very similar to that of a single dwelling. To make it the 2 dwellings, there's been slight changes. There are more dormer windows on the east elevation. Again, just going back to the site layout, again, the scheme seeks to maintain the parking for the flats, and so you've got the properties, you've got the flats, and then at the bottom end of the site, you've got the amenity space, which was originally approved as 1 area. That's now going to be subdivided with 2. The scheme also includes a garden shed, which we saw this morning is actually in place. One thing that I would like to add is, going on site this morning, the site has been quite significantly cleared, and a number of the boundaries at the rear of the properties on Stanwell Road are particularly open. So we'd also would like to recommend an additional condition for means of enclosure to be added, because that's not on the recommendation list of conditions. So if you're mindful to grant, that should be added. It'd be condition 14. Again, so the dwelling very much is similar to that previously approved. In terms of impact on trees, there are no more trees being taken away now than were previously taken away before. Again, there's similar issues with the previous scheme of issues of overlooking. Again, in terms of the angles and the distances, mindful is Rectory Court next to the site, but the angles and distances are such that there's no overlooking. In particular, we've got number 4 Stanwell Road, which joins the western sort of southwest elevation. They will be overlooking a blank elevation of the application site. The scale and the massing is such, and particularly the screen along the side, that development won't have an overbearing impact. It's a bit of an unusual layout in the way that the garden is remote from the dwelling, but ultimately, in line with our guidance on both parking and household development, the scheme itself is probably a good example of utilising a redundant brownfield site to deliver 2 houses with associated parking and amenity space as well. Also worth mentioning that as part of the scheme, we are looking at in the round with the conversion of the completed conversion of the apartments at the front. So in line with that, we've secured £5,336 towards off-site public open space contribution, and there's also an affordable housing requirement for both dwellings, which would equate to £55,540.80. It's worth noting that the agent has indicated that one of the dwellings would be occupied by the developer builder as a self-build, so obviously in line with the new affordable housing SPG. If he or she can prove occupation for 3 years or more and comply with all the requirements and not hit any of the disqualifying events, then then they could claim that relief after that period and not have to pay the full amount. But so really the officer recommendations to approve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Thomas. We'll pop your microphone on for us. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Firstly, the chart on page 117 that refers to Stanwell Ward should perhaps read St Augustine's. It's not in Stanwell.
Right. So obviously, it's unfortunate these figures came from our housing team. I mean, I suspect, notwithstanding that the biggest demand, whether it's Stanwell Ward or the adjoining ward, would be one-bed units. So I would pretty confident in saying that the need would still be the same in the adjoining ward.
Yeah, certainly. In fact, the need is greater in St Augustine than it is in Stanwell. The reason I called it in is because partly because I was aware of the planning history on this site and the concerns that this committee and others have had with overdevelopments in the original application, which went back to talking about 9 dwellings in the main building, which is next to this, and that this was passed then in a subsequent application with 7 in the main building and 1 on this site, and now we're up to we're coming back to ask for 2 on this site. The size of the other thing is I would like to see in the conditions something specific about that garden, which is so far divorced from this property and such a tempting size to become yet another development. I'd like to see something in regards to that not being possible.
Just, I think you've still got your...
No, you're right.
Okay. Yeah, just in terms of the history, I mean, there was some discussion this morning. I think some of the members felt that we'd previously seen an application for 2 properties on this site. And I think the confusion lies, if you look at page 115 of the report, application reference 2014-13-01392, that was an application for 9 properties. That wasn't just a conversion, that was extension, they were extensions as well. So that application was refused, and it talks about incongruous and intrusive sort of extensions to that property. So subsequent to that, we had an application in for 7 units. And then, I guess, prior to that, we had approved the single dwelling on the site. So although ultimately we're now left with the same number of units, we're not left with the same impact that we had on the principal building. So units are one thing, but the impact is different. So we've approved the scheme for the 7 on the principal building at 2 Stonewall Road, and that's I think where the confusion lies in thinking that. So the numbers might be the same overall, but not the impact or the type of development. And just on your final point about sort of restricting the use of the garden, I mean, it would, to put a dwelling there would require a planning application. I mean, personally, without prejudicing any future application, I can't see how we would probably approve a dwelling there. There may well be highway issues. There certainly would be issues of overlooking, issues of appropriateness, overdevelopment, etc., etc. So we normally wouldn't condition to prevent an application. The planning application process itself is what considers whether development is or isn't acceptable.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate Councillor Thomas may have noted the statistical error late in the day, but obviously if we can get those to officers as soon as possible, then all of us can see the accurate figures, because clearly there is a housing need in St Augustine's ward, and it'd be good to have that in the papers. We can at least put in the matters arising, but thank you for pointing that out. Any other members wish to make any comments? Councillor Bird.
I'll move officer's recommendation, Chair.
With the additional condition. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Hodges was first up with a hand. If there's no other points, then I'll move that to a vote. All those in favour, officer recommendations? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. That brings us to a close. Have a great summer. I'll see you in the new after summer.